Hello, everybody. Welcome to my election prediction video. This one is between Biden and Trump, as promised in the last video. Before we get into anything, please subscribe. Look, it helps me out so much, and it literally takes you 1 second, and you just have to click. Please subscribe. And if this video does well, I might do some more election predictions, maybe the Senate, maybe different candidates. We'll have to see. But yeah. So I've already gone and characterized all the safe states, and for both Trump and Biden, which gives Trump 113 electoral votes and Biden 181. Now, before we get into the swing states, I'm just gonna say this: this would not be good for Republicans. Look, in 2022, the American public said, "Look, we don't like Biden because of inflation and crime," but they ended up voting for Democrats in a lot of those key swing races because they didn't like the Republicans with their arguable extremism and their election denialism. So, yeah, and nominating Trump would be flying in the face. That message would be completely ignoring it, which yes, I can do, but it very much wouldn't help them, and Biden would ultimately end up winning. So first off, we're going to characterize the Trump likely states. Now, first off, we have South Carolina. Now, many of you might be surprised to see South Carolina likely column, but in the last election, in 2016, it was likely margins both times, and ultimately it's going to stay there. It's very much not competitive, but will still fall in the likely margin. But then you got Iowa, Ohio, and Maine 2nd Congressional District. Now, these states used to be swing states, or in the case of Maine 2nd Congressional District, a more liberal area. But what happened is Trump's style of working class populism managed to transform these states electorally, and now they're very much in the likely Republican column. Yes, maybe Democrats can make a play for one of these if they put in a lot of effort, but ultimately, I don't think they will. This is where nominating Trump, I guess, would prove to be useful, but ultimately DeSantis or any other candidate could probably pull this off at this point due to the, shift in these states. Okay, but either way, moving on, we also have Florida. Now, Florida, as early back as 2018, used to be like a swing state, one of the most competitive states in the nation. But what happened is DeSantis has really flipped the state's politics on its head. Say what you will about him, whether you like him or love him, but ultimately he's a really effective politician, and he's managed to transform that state. So ultimately, it's going to be likely. I mean, he won it by 20 points. I don't think Trump's going to win it by 20 points, obviously, but he's going to win by a solid 6, 7, maybe even 8-point margin. Now then you got Alaska. Now, the thing is that unbeknownst to most people, Alaska has been going through a major electoral transformation. If you look back in 2000, Alaska went to Bush by 30 points. And ever since then, every election, with the exception of 2016, it's been trending towards the Democrats. So much so that in 2020, it only went to Trump by 10 points. And you also saw Patulta winning that special House election and then winning re-election. Now, ultimately, I do think the Republicans will obviously hold on, but that margin might go down to 8%, maybe even 6%. Obviously, won't know until election day. Now, then I believe that's all. Okay, now we're going to be doing our likely Democratic states, or Biden states. So first off, you have New Mexico. And now look, occasionally Republicans can make New Mexico competitive. However, even when it's kind of competitive, ultimately it still usually falls in a lean or likely margin. So ultimately, Democrats are going to retain it. They won by 10 points last time, maybe by less, maybe by more. It depends on how big the Republicans' gains with Hispanic voters are. But yeah, ultimately going to remain a likely margin. And then you've got Colorado. Now, Colorado is, I would say, the anti-Florida. Colorado used to be really competitive. Back in 2016, it only went to Trump by it only went to Clinton by 4 or 5 points. But then it changed a D plus 13 state, and Polis also won by a large margin. So what I think you're seeing is that Colorado's politics are changing. While I don't think Democrats can get in the safe margin very much, it's going to be very hard for Republicans to win in this state, in the future, because even when they normally approaches Canada, they still lost decently. Ultimately, Colorado is a likely Democratic state. Yeah, okay. And then you got Virginia and New Hampshire. Now, these states, used to be somewhat competitive, and they still kind of are. I'm not saying they're out of reach for Republicans, but Democrats have definitely made significant gains in these states, despite, the Virginia governor's race. So ultimately, they're going to remain that likely margin, like 7, 6 points. But, at the low end for Democrats, like 13 points, like the high end for them. Ultimately, these states have shifted very much. Then they got Minnesota. Now, look, Trump's, appeal to the Rust Belt voters has definitely lowered Minnesota's electoral margin. As an example, I think in 2012 went to the Democrats by 7 points. In 2016 went to them by like 1 point. But ultimately in 2020, you saw Democrats recover a lot of their last support in Minnesota, going up to 7%. And you saw Democrats easily win the governor's race. So ultimately, although maybe a Republican could make Minnesota competitive, ultimately it's probably not going to happen this election, and it's going to remain in that Democratic likely column. Oh, and then we have Maine at large. Look, Trump definitely sifted Maine. Like back in 2012, it went from a 15-point margin to a 2-point margin. So it's very much, Trump shifted the state a lot, but that appeals to those kind of like Rust Bunny voters. But ultimately, Maine, it's still going to prior Maine like margin. Republicans probably aren't going to put that much effort into winning it. Ultimately, going to Maine not like the margin. And those are all the likely states. Now we're going to move to the lean states. We're going to start with the Trump lean states, of which there's only one, Texas. Now look, you've seen Democrats make great gains in the state. As an example, back in 2012, when Republicans by like 16 points, 2016 only went by 9 points, and in 2020 it only went by like 5 points. Now, ultimately, I think Democrats will continue those gains, make like some slight more gains in the state, maybe getting it down to like a 4% margin. This is especially considering that Trump is not a good candidate. However, ultimately, Democrats aren't going to do as well as they've hoped. Ultimately, I think we've seen that demographics aren't necessarily destiny. As Republicans have made those gains among Hispanic voters, as you saw in the 2022 governor race. Now, I don't think this race will be as large of a margin for Republicans as in that governor's race, but ultimately, yeah, Democrats do still need to put a lot of work if they want to flip Texas. And I think they probably will put some of that work, because that could definitely redraw the electoral map in their favor. But ultimately, they're probably not going to win this election. Very likely won't. And then we have the Democratic lean states, which there are a lot of. So first off, you got Nevada and Arizona. So Nevada, look, Republicans have some of the ability to sometimes make it competitive, but ultimately what you see is the Democrats usually end up prevailing, not in the governor's race this time, but they did in the Senate race. So ultimately, going to remain in Biden's column. And then you got Arizona. Arizona is one of those more establishmentarian Republican states. As an example, in the Secretary of Education race, a more establishment Republican easily defeated the Democratic incumbent. But what you saw is they very much rejected that kind of MAGA, arguably extremism. As an example, Katie Hobbs won her race, then Kelly won his race easily. So yeah, it's like that. Now, Georgia is in a similar vein. You saw Kemp easily win re-election while Walker failed to win that Senate seat, and likewise will remain likely margin. I think that pushback against the MAGA extremism will grow a bit, and that's why these are moving from tilt to lean. Now then you got the Rust Belt states, the quintessential Rust Belt states that flipped from Obama to Trump back to Biden. Now look, Republicans have definitely made them competitive, especially under Trump. However, ultimately, you saw Democrats bounce back in 2020, and I think they're going to continue to improve on those margins, bringing Wisconsin to a lean Democratic state. This is merely because, Trumpism as a whole is becoming a lot less popular. I definitely don't think, it might be overblown by some of the media, but very much this is not going to be a good choice for Republicans. It's going to hurt them electorally. Yeah, I think Democrats are going to win Democrats are going to win here, yeah. Then you have Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Now, look, back in 2020, they really blew this out of the water. They won by 7 percentage points. And although the district has become a bit more Republican in redistricting, ultimately with Democrats' strong margin there, this is still going to go Democratic by a 2, 3, 4 point margin. Easily going Democrat. Well, not necessarily easily, but very much so going Democratic. And then you have North Carolina, which is our only tilt state and our only tilt Republican state. Now, look, although this state didn't go for Biden last time in 2020, it was pretty narrow. They only won by 1 point. Trump only won by 1.3 points. And I feel like, as you start to see Trump become a bit more unpopular, I do think Democrats can narrow that margin up to a tilt margin. But they're probably not going to win the state unless they put in a lot of effort, which I think they could, and then they might have a shot winning the state. It ultimately depends on how the campaign goes. but ultimately, I think Republicans will narrowly hold on. However, this is very much is like a Democratic. It's very much hopeful for Democrats. As an example, the best comparison I could think of is that North Carolina is kind of where Georgia was before it began its big flip. Obviously, not exactly, but yes, Democrats put in some strong effort, and they could very much win North Carolina. So this is my election prediction. Things obviously may change. Maybe Trump makes a bounce back and starts to become more competitive, or maybe he becomes even more unpopular and Biden wins even easier. Well, Biden wins easily. Ultimately, we don't know yet, but this is my final prediction. Please like and subscribe, and see you for our next video.